getting started on mini painting can be not easy. I'm sure some of you hobby veterans are sitting in the audience thinking to yourself, what do you mean? You just put paint on a model. It's easy, right? Well, for a new person, not so much. The problem is there's a lot of hobby stuff out there. There's a lot of moving parts. In fact, there's just, well, a lot of parts in general. Recently, I've been trying to get some friends of mine into the hobby, and, well, that kind of got me thinking about the question, what do you actually need to get started on the hobby? And that's kind of a big question because there's a lot of stuff out there on the hobby market. Some of it is good, some of it is not good, but that really got me thinking, what do you really need? What is the definitive list of things that you need to get started with miniature painting? Disclaimer. So, this stuff, this video, this is just like all my opinion, man.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
The truth is that, like everything in this stupid hobby, it's all personal opinion. See, one person could really love one thing and another person could absolutely hate it. So, as much as this is a quote unquote definitive list, these are all products that you should start off with, in my opinion. What you need to do is experiment. Go out, buy things, try them out, see what works for you, see what doesn't work for you, because that's what's really important. I just want to give you a place to start. This may come as a surprise to you, but in order to get started on mini painting, you're going to need a mini to paint, which is a surprisingly big question. You need to ask yourself all sorts of questions like, what is my mini made of? Is it plastic? Is it metal? Does it require assembly? What kind of glue do I need? These are all really, really important questions to ask yourself as you go out and buy a mini, because all of those factors can actually change how you go about painting the mini or how you go about building it. In my opinion, the best place to start is a plastic model from a big, well-known company. Now, before you indie game enthusiasts out there jump on me in the comments, let me explain what I'm thinking. You see, there's a lot of great indie games out there, and they make really good minis. The thing is, when you're starting out, what you really need is consistency, which is something that big companies do really, really well. You see, when you first start off, you don't want to spend too much time fiddling around with your model. You don't want to be thinking about resin, metal, or, just general things that you have to take care of before you even put a single drop of paint on the model. It's best to start with the basics and then move on from there. Okay, so now we got our mini. What's next? The first thing you're going to need to do is probably build it. Most plastic kits require some sort of assembly, and in order to get started with assembly, you're going to need a pair of clippers to get the bits off the sprue. Now, before you go run off to that toolbox that your parents got you for college, we need to think about something. Well, you could certainly make your toolbox clippers work. Trust me, I used mine for way too long. A good pair of hobby snips are a night and day difference. They are 100% worth the investment, and they will save you so much time down the line when you go and actually start cutting things out. The main difference between a nice pair of hobby snips and that pair in your toolbox is hobby snips are much more sharp, which makes for more precise cuts and less cleanup later. So, now that we have our bits taken off the sprue, the next thing that we're going to need to do is clean them up a little bit. No matter how good your hobby clippers are, you're always going to be left with little bits of plastic left over from the sprue, and you're going to need to clean them up. So we're going to need a tool to scrape that stuff off. My go-to tool for this is a good old-fashioned hobby knife. An X-Acto knife works perfectly. What I do is I use the sharp front of the blade to remove larger pieces of plastic from the sprue, and I use the dull back of the blade to scrape off mold lines. So now that we have all of our bits cut out and cleaned up, the next thing that we need to do is actually build our mini. In order to build the mini, we're going to need some sort of glue. Generally speaking, there's two different types of glue when we talk about building plastic minis. We have super glue and we have plastic glue. Personally, I keep both around my desk. I think they both have different applications, but some people are diehard super glue fans and some people won't get caught using anything other than plastic glue. So, unfortunately, it's one of those things that you're going to have to experiment with and see what you like best. Before you make your decision about whether to choose super glue or plastic glue, the one thing you need to know is that plastic glue isn't actually a type of adhesive. Plastic glue is actually a solvent. So when you go and use plastic glue, what you're actually doing is melting two pieces of plastic together. This is really great for adhesive purposes because it keeps things together and it's a lot stronger than super glue. But the thing that you need to be careful of is if you make a mistake, you could end up literally melting your model. The bottom line is you should probably get both and experiment and see what you like more. So this brings us to our next step, which is priming. Priming is another super important step because without priming, painting our model is going to be not impossible, but pretty difficult. See, priming preps the surface of a mini by making it porous, grippy for paint. I don't know the exact science behind it, but if you ever try painting on pure plastic, it's not exactly great. See, the main problem with plastic as a painting surface is that it's really smooth. So when you apply wet things to smooth surfaces, it beads up and doesn't look good. Think about putting like water on a mirror or something like that. So what primer does is it creates a bumpy surface for this paint to stick onto, allowing us to create nice smooth layers of paint. Now, primer comes in all shapes and sizes. I mean, you can get spray primer, you could get it for airbrush, black, white, you can prime in all sorts of different colors. The main thing is that you get a nice consistent primer, and for that, I really just recommend Citadels Chaos Black. You can get it at most game stores. It works all the time, it looks great, and it's kind of shiny, which allows you to kind of see where highlights go when you decide to, I don't know, move on to volumetric highlighting or something more complicated. It's a good primer.
Primer.
Quick little aside though. So I'd mentioned an airbrush, and this is kind of a hobby hot take, but you should really get an airbrush if you can. You see, airbrushes allow us to do things faster, and if you're just starting out, a lot of people don't really recommend getting an airbrush, but I do. The thing is if you're really going to get into mini painting, you're going to buy a lot of minis, and it's really helpful to just have an airbrush and learn how to airbrush. You're probably going to get an airbrush anyways, so might as well start now. To sum it all up, what you're going to need is a good bottle, a good pair of clippers, an X-Acto knife, some glue, and a good primer. This brings us to painting, which is kind of like the star of the show. Also, it's the biggest section of this entire video. So the thing with paint is it's an absolutely massive subject. There's a lot of paint out there and even more colors. So where do you start? The place that I recommend is any good reputable paint company. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. Vallejo, Citadel, Monuments, Army Painter. Really, you can't go wrong with any one of those. What I recommend for beginners is to just shop around. There's a lot of paint out there, and what you need to do is you just need to test it. Buy a couple different paints from all the different paint brands, try them out, see what you like, pay attention to the characteristics of the paint. Do they cover well? Do they flow well? How pigmented are they? These are all things that you need to pay attention to so that way you can inform your decision on which paints you like best. Most importantly, don't just stick with one paint brand. Shop around, try out. All the different paints out there react differently to different stuff, and some paints in some paint brands are really great, others really suck. So it's just up to you to find out which ones you like. Side note, don't buy too much paint to begin with. Don't do it. I did it. Don't buy too much paint. Just you're not going to use it all. You're never going to use it all. Just buy what you need. Now that we have our paint, we need somewhere to put it while we paint. And that brings us to the most important part of this video. If there is only one piece of knowledge that you leave this video with, it's this. Get a wet palette. Wet palettes are cheap and they will make your painting lives so much better. They keep your paint wet longer, you don't waste as much paint, they'll make you a better painter. Now, I'm sure there's tons of people out there that paint with dry palettes, and that's fine, I guess, but for a new person, just get a wet palette, learn to paint on a wet palette. It's just worth it. It's just always going to be worth it. So now we have paint, we have palette. The next thing we need is a paintbrush. Now, personally, I'm a brush nerd. I own like 30 different paintbrushes. You do not need to buy 30 different paintbrushes. Brushes usually fall into two different types. There's natural hair brushes and there's synthetic hair brushes. Both of them have their uses. So what I recommend is for you to get one nice natural hair brush and a nice set of synthetic brushes. The main difference between natural hair brushes and synthetic hair brushes is natural brushes are, you might have guessed it, made out of natural things like animal hair. Kolinsky sable is going to be the most common that you find. but there's also like wolf hair brushes and goat hair. I don't know. Just Kolinsky sable is the one that you're probably looking for. Synthetic hair brushes, on the other hand, they're made from plastic. The main difference between the two of them performance-wise is your sable brushes, your natural hair brushes, those are your sniper rifles. They're your Ferraris. They're your precision instrument. They keep a very nice point, and they keep it for a very long time if you take care of them. That being said, they're kind of delicate, so keep them out of things that hurt them. And that's where your synthetic brushes come in. Synthetic brushes are kind of like your mudding truck. They're your Ford F-150. They're meant to take a beating. They're a little bit more delicate in the sense that they don't last as long, but they're good for things like washes, contrast paints, and metallics, things that your Kolinsky sable brush won't like. The next thing we need to think about when we talk about brushes is brush size. Now, brush size is pretty subjective. Some people like to paint with bigger brushes, others like to paint with smaller brushes, and there's ups and downs to both of them. Mainly, bigger brushes have more paint inside of them, so they don't dry out as quickly. Smaller brushes will, dry out quicker, but they have a nice fine point, so they're easy to maneuver around a model. Once again, it comes down to personal preference, so I recommend trying out a wide range of paint brushes. So to sum it up, what I recommend is you get one very nice Kolinsky sable brush, something like an Artis Opus, a Winsor Newton, a Monument, any one of those brands will work. That's going to be your Ferrari. It's going to be your fine detail brush. And then I recommend that you get a couple different sizes of synthetic brushes. Those can be Citadel brushes. You can get them from the grocery store, from the dollar store, wherever. The point is you want to have one very nice brush for detail work and then a nice set of brushes that are for your beater work that is going to mess up a Kolinsky sable brush. Last but not least, that brings us to basing. And some people love basing, some people hate it. My thing is that basing is non-negotiable. Here's the thing, guys. Listen, so you're going to spend all this time painting your beautiful model and you're going to put all this time and effort into it. Don't let it down by just putting it on a plain base. Just do something with it. You don't even have to do a lot with the base. What I recommend for beginners is just get a texture paste. There's these big bottles that like Vallejo makes, and then what it is basically just like paste that emulates ground texture. That's weird. But it's just like a thick paste with sand in it, and it looks like the ground. So, some texture pastes even come pre-colored. You don't even need to paint them. Bottom line is just slap some of that stuff on there, give your model something to stand on, and you're good. And that actually brings us to the end of the video. The first thing you'll need is a good plastic mini. Side note, you might want to grab a handle so that way you can hold on to your mini while you paint it. A good pair of hobby clippers. Stay out of that toolbox. A sharp hobby knife, like an xacto blade. Use the front sharp end to shave off the big nubs and the back to get rid of mold lines. Either plastic or super glue. Just remember that plastic glue can melt your mini. Primer. Color and brand don't really matter, but I recommend starting with Citadels Chaos Black, or get an airbrush. You should get an airbrush. Paint. Shop around and try different brands, and remember, don't get too many to start off with. The only part of this video that really matters, a wet palette. Get a wet palette. Paintbrushes. A nice set of synthetics and a good Kolinsky sable hairbrush will get you everywhere you need to go. Last but not least, a big pot of texture paste for basing your minis. Remember, go as crazy as you want, just get something on the base. Honorable mention, paper towels and a paint cup because you're going to need somewhere to wipe your brush and somewhere to clean it. Well, that wraps up this week's video. As I said in the beginning, these are all my personal opinions and you have to experiment to find what works best for you. What I want for this video to be is a starting place for you to refer to as you begin your hobby journey. As always, thanks for stopping by. I'm Mike, and this is Weekend Warrior Minis, where the only bad model is an unpainted one. Remember to like and subscribe for more content. See you later.